The millionaire went to eat a pastry, and when he saw the pastry seller's necklace, he began to break into a cold sweat. It was simply the same necklace that he had given to his childhood girlfriend. Subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories like this one. The morning fog rolled through the cobblestone streets of Bath, England, as James Harrison adjusted his Italian silk tie in the mirror of his Range Rover. At 47, he had mastered the art of the perfect Windsor knot, one of the many small details that had helped him climb to the top of the real estate development world. His salt and pepper hair and tailored suit projected the image of success he had spent decades cultivating. From his parking spot, he could see the grand Georgian architecture that made Bath famous, buildings he had helped preserve and develop over the years. The Millennium Hotel project, his latest venture, was set to break ground next month. Everything in his life moved with precise, calculated efficiency. Board meetings, investment decisions, charity galas. Yet something had felt oddly hollow lately, a sentiment he couldn't quite shake. James checked his watch, a habit more ingrained than necessary, and decided he had time for his morning ritual at Carter's Patisserie. The small shop had become his daily indulgence over the past month, not just for their exceptional pastries, but for the inexplicable pull he felt toward the place. He had discovered it during one of his morning walks, drawn in by the aroma of freshly baked croissants and the charming window display. The bell chimed softly as he pushed open the door, and the warm scent of butter and vanilla enveloped him. Behind the counter, the young pastry chef was carefully arranging a tray of elaborately decorated eclairs. Her movements were precise, artistic, each gesture suggesting years of practiced dedication despite her youth. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she greeted him with a warm smile, her blonde hair neatly tucked under a baker's cap. "The usual." "Please, Emily," he responded, returning her smile. "And perhaps one of those eclairs as well." "They look magnificent." As she reached for his regular order, a pain au chocolat and an Americano, something caught James's eye. Around her neck, partially visible beneath her collar, was a delicate gold chain. She leaned forward to place his coffee on the counter, and the pendant slipped into view, a small oval locket with an intricate pattern of intertwined roses. James felt the world tilt slightly. His hand froze midway to his wallet, his eyes fixed on the piece of jewelry. It was impossible. The design was unique. He knew because he had spent weeks working with a jeweler to create it 22 years ago. He had given it to Sarah, his college sweetheart, the night before he left for London to pursue his career dreams. "Mr. Harrison," Emily's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right?" He forced himself to focus, to breathe. "Yes, I'm sorry, that's a beautiful necklace you're wearing." Emily's hand instinctively went to the locket. "Oh, thank you. It was my mother's. She gave it to me on my 18th birthday." Her fingers traced the familiar pattern. "It's quite special to me." James paid for his breakfast, his mind racing. The coincidence was too precise, too specific. Sarah's face floated in his memory, her bright blue eyes, the same shade as Emily's, he realized with a start. He had often wondered about Sarah over the years, especially in quiet moments when success felt emptiest. They had lost touch after he moved to London, his ambition and her reluctance to leave Bath creating an insurmountable distance. As he walked back to his car, the pastry forgotten in its bag, James's thoughts whirled with possibilities. Emily must be around 21, he calculated. The timing aligned perfectly with his last summer with Sarah. But surely, if Sarah had been pregnant, she would have told him. Wouldn't she? He sat in his car, watching the morning light play across the honey-colored Bathstone buildings. The city had always felt like home, even after his years in London. Perhaps that's why he had moved his company's headquarters back here 5 years ago. Or perhaps something deeper had drawn him back to these familiar streets. James pulled out his phone, his finger hovering over his assistant's number. He had built his career on careful research and due diligence. Surely those same skills could be applied here. The question was, did he want to unravel this thread? Did he want to risk disturbing the careful order of his life for what might be nothing more than coincidence? The locket's image burned in his mind. He remembered the day he had picked it up from the jeweler, how he had carefully placed a small photo of himself inside before giving it to Sarah. He wondered if that photo was still there, hidden behind the delicate gold casing. His decision was made before he consciously reached it. He pressed the call button. "Linda, clear my schedule for the next few days. There's something personal I need to investigate." The next few days became a careful dance of observation and quiet inquiry for James. Each morning, he would arrive at Carter's patisserie, his regular order becoming a cover for something far more meaningful than coffee and pastries. He watched Emily work, noting every gesture, every smile that might connect her to Sarah or to himself. The similarities were undeniable. Emily had Sarah's graceful movements, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, but there was something else too. The determined set of her jaw when dealing with a difficult customer, the subtle furrow of her brow as she perfected a decoration. These were expressions James recognized from his own reflection. Through casual conversations with other patrons and staff, he learned more about her. Emily had graduated top of her class from the prestigious Le Cordon Bleu in London, turning down lucrative offers from high-end restaurants to return to Bath. She lived with her mother in a small cottage in Widcombe, just outside the city centre, and harbored dreams of opening her own boutique hotel with an attached patisserie. "Your eclairs are exceptional," James commented one morning, watching her pipe perfect lines of crème pâtissière. "Where did you learn to bake like this?" Emily's face lit up at the question. "My mum started teaching me when I was little. We couldn't afford many toys, but we always had flour and sugar." She laughed, a sound that stirred something deep in James's memory. "She worked 2 jobs to put me through culinary school. I owe her everything." The mention of financial struggles twisted something in James's chest. If his suspicions were correct, if Emily was indeed his daughter, then Sarah had shouldered the burden of parenthood alone, while he had been accumulating wealth and success in London. His private investigator had been discreet but thorough. Sarah Carter had never married, had moved to Bath from Bristol 21 years ago, and had given birth to Emily on September 15th, almost exactly 9 months after that last Christmas he had spent with her. The timing was impossible to ignore. Back in his office, James stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunset paint the city's limestone buildings in shades of gold. On his desk lay a small velvet box containing a locket identical to Emily's. He had commissioned it from the same jeweler who had made the original, using old photos and his memory of the design. He opened it carefully, revealing the small compartment inside. In the original, he had placed a photo of himself at 25, full of ambition and dreams. He wondered if that photo was still there, hidden inside Emily's necklace, or if Sarah had replaced it with something else years ago. His phone buzzed with a message from Linda, his assistant. She had managed to track down Sarah's current workplace. She was the head librarian at Bath Central Library. The thought of her surrounded by books made him smile. She had always been happiest, lost in stories, something he had found both endearing and frustrating in their youth. While he had been planning their future, she had been content to live in the present. James picked up the replica locket, letting it catch the evening light. Tomorrow he would visit the library. After 22 years, he would face Sarah again. The questions he needed to ask burned in his throat. Why hadn't she told him? Had she truly believed he wouldn't have wanted to know? Would he have made different choices if he had known? His office phone interrupted his thoughts. The contractor for the Millennium Hotel project needed decisions about the foundation work. James looked at the plans spread across his desk, the careful architecture, the precise calculations, the predictable outcomes. How different from the delicate human architecture he was now discovering, built on secrets and silence and choices made decades ago. He postponed the contractor's questions. For the first time in his career, business would have to wait. There were more important foundations that needed his attention now. That evening, as he drove home to his penthouse apartment, James took a detour past the small cottage in Widcombe. Lights glowed warmly in the windows, and through the kitchen curtains, he could see 2 figures moving about. Sarah and Emily, his past and possibly his future, sharing a simple evening together. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting the urge to walk up to their door right then. But he knew he needed to approach this carefully. One wrong move could shatter the delicate possibility of connection before it even began. Tomorrow he would start with Sarah. She deserved that much, the chance to explain, to prepare, to decide how this story should unfold. As he drove away, the replica locket sat heavy in his pocket, a physical reminder of the weight of lost time and the fragile hope of redemption. Bath Central Library stood as a testament to Victorian grandeur, its imposing stone facade a stark contrast to the modern lives that flowed through its doors. James Harrison found himself hesitating at the entrance, his usual confidence wavering. He had rehearsed this moment countless times over the past days, but now that it was here, words seemed inadequate. The main reading room was quiet, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto wooden tables where students and readers sat absorbed in their own worlds. A helpful assistant directed him to the librarian's office, and with each step down the book-lined corridor, memories of Sarah grew stronger. He knocked on the door marked Head Librarian Sarah Carter, and her voice, still so familiar after all these years, called out, "Come in." James opened the door, and 22 years collapsed into a single breath. Sarah looked up from her desk, and the pen she was holding clattered to the floor. She was still beautiful, her blonde hair now streaked with silver, laugh lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But her blue eyes, Emily's eyes, were exactly as he remembered them. "James." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you? How did you—" He closed the door quietly behind him. "Hello, Sarah. It's been a long time." She stood slowly, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. "Why are you here?" There was fear in her voice, and something else, resignation perhaps, as if she had always known this day would come. "I've been visiting Carter's patisserie," he said carefully, watching her face. "Emily makes exceptional pastries." The color drained from Sarah's face. She sank back into her chair, her eyes never leaving his. "You've met Emily?" "I have." James took a step forward, reaching into his pocket to withdraw the replica locket. "I noticed she wears a very particular piece of jewelry, one I remember quite well." Sarah's hand went to her throat, a gesture so similar to Emily's that it made his heart ache. "James, Is she mine, Sarah?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with 2 decades of unspoken truths. The timing, her age, I had to know. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "I wanted to tell you. So many times I picked up the phone, but you didn't." There was no accusation in his voice, only a profound sadness. "Why?" Sarah wiped her eyes, gathering herself. "You were so excited about London, about all your plans. When I found out I was pregnant, you had already started your new life. Your calls were getting less frequent, full of stories about deals and meetings and networking events." She smiled sadly. "I knew if I told you, you would have come back, given up everything you'd worked for. I couldn't bear to be the reason you abandoned your dreams." "That wasn't your decision to make," James said quietly. "I had a right to know I had a daughter." "You're right." Sarah's admission seemed to cost her physically. "But I was 23, scared, and watching the man I loved become someone new from hundreds of miles away. By the time I realized I'd made a mistake in not telling you, Emily was walking and talking, and it seemed too late to upend her world." James sat in the chair opposite her desk, placing the replica locket between them. "I had this made when I recognized the original. I remember having the jeweler add a hidden compartment for the photo. Is my picture still in Emily's locket?" Sarah nodded, tears flowing freely now. "She opens it sometimes, asks about the young man in the photo. I told her it was someone I loved very much, who had to go away. She stopped asking for details as she got older." "Does she know anything about me?" "She knows you were my college sweetheart, that you moved to London to become successful." Sarah hesitated. "She knows you didn't know about her, so she's never had to feel rejected." "I made sure of that." James absorbed this information, grateful for Sarah's kindness even in her deception. "I want to tell her, Sarah. She deserves to know the truth." "And what then?" Sarah's protective instincts flared. "You'll sweep in with your wealth and success? Try to make up for lost time with grand gestures?" "She's not a business deal, James. She's a young woman who's worked incredibly hard for everything she has." "I know that," James replied, thinking of Emily's skilled hands crafting delicate pastries, of her dreams of owning her own hotel. "I've watched her work. She has your grace and my determination. I don't want to disrupt her life, Sarah, but I want a chance to know my daughter, to help her achieve her dreams if she'll let me." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying him. "You've changed," she finally said. "The James I knew would have been angry, would have threatened legal action or tried to throw money at the situation. 22 years of success teaches you what really matters," he answered, "and what doesn't." The library clock chimed the hour, breaking the tension. Sarah reached for a tissue, dabbing at her eyes. "She works until 6 today. Come to the cottage afterward. We'll tell her together." She wrote down their address, though James already knew it. "But James, let me talk to her first. Prepare her. This will change everything for her." James stood, pocketing the replica locket. "Thank you, Sarah, for raising her so well, for protecting her." He paused at the door. "I know this won't be easy, but I want to try. For all of us." As he walked back through the library, James felt lighter, despite the weight of the conversation. The truth was finally out, at least part of it. Tonight would bring the harder conversation, the one that would determine whether his newfound daughter would allow him into her life. Outside, the spring sun had broken through the morning clouds, warming the honey-colored stone of the library. James checked his watch. 8 hours until he would see them both again. 8 hours to prepare for a conversation that would change 3 lives forever. The cottage in Widcombe looked different in the evening light. James sat in his car, watching as Emily's figure moved past the kitchen window. She was still wearing her baker's uniform, her hair loose now around her shoulders. From his position, he could see Sarah pacing in the living room, stopping occasionally to peer out at the street. The dashboard clock showed 6:45 p.m. They had agreed he would arrive at 7, giving Sarah time to prepare Emily. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he watched Emily sit down at what appeared to be their dinner table, completely unaware that her life was about to change forever. At precisely 7, James walked up the narrow garden path to their door. The cottage was small but well-maintained, with climbing roses framing the entrance and herb gardens tucked into every available space. He recognized this as the source of the fresh mint and lavender he had noticed in Emily's pastries. Sarah opened the door before he could knock. Her face was pale but composed. "She's in the living room," she whispered. "I've told her there's something important we need to discuss, but—" She trailed off, her hand trembling slightly as she gestured for him to enter. The living room was cozy, with well-worn furniture and walls lined with books. Emily stood by the fireplace, one hand absently touching the locket around her neck. She looked confused, then surprised to see him. "Mr. Harrison." "Mum, what's going on?" Her voice held a note of uncertainty that made James's heart ache. Sarah moved to stand beside her daughter, taking her hand. "Emily, sweetheart, please sit down. There's something we need to tell you." She guided Emily to the sofa, sitting beside her, while James took the armchair opposite them. "You're scaring me," Emily said, looking between them. "Has something happened?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Do you remember asking me about the photo in your locket? The young man I told you about?" Emily's hand went to the locket again, a gesture James now recognized as habitual. "Of course. You said he was someone special to you, someone who had to leave." Her eyes widened as she turned to look at James, the first hint of understanding crossing her face. "That photo was taken 22 years ago," James said softly. "I gave that locket to your mother the night before I left for London." Emily stood abruptly, stepping away from both of them. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, that's not—" "Mum?" Sarah reached for her daughter, but Emily moved further away. "It's true, darling. James, Mr. Harrison is your father." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's hands went to the locket, fumbling with the clasp until it opened. She stared at the small photo inside, then at James, her face a storm of emotions. "All this time," she whispered. "All these weeks you've been coming to the patisserie, you knew?" "No," James said quickly. "I only realized the possibility when I saw your locket. That's why I had to speak with your mother first, to confirm what I suspected." Emily turned to Sarah, tears spilling down her cheeks. "And you've known all along where he was, who he was?" "I've served him coffee and pastries for weeks, and you never said a word." "I didn't know he was back in Bath," Sarah replied, her voice breaking. "I hadn't seen him since before you were born. When you mentioned a new regular customer named James Harrison, I never connected—" "This is insane," Emily's voice rose. "You're telling me that my father, who I've wondered about my entire life, has been leaving me tips and complimenting my eclairs. That the successful businessman everyone in Bath talks about is my—" She couldn't finish the sentence. James stood slowly. "Emily, I know this is overwhelming. I want you to know that I had no idea about you. If I had known—" "You would have what?" Emily interrupted. "Swooped in with your millions? Made everything perfect?" She laughed bitterly. Do you know how many extra shifts Mum took to put me through culinary school? How many nights I stayed up wondering why my father didn't want to know me? Emily, please, Sarah started, but Emily cut her off. And you, she turned to her mother. You let me believe he didn't know about me, that it wasn't his choice to stay away. But it was your choice, wasn't it? You chose to keep me from him. I was trying to protect both of you, Sarah said softly. Protect us? Emily's voice cracked. From what? From having a father. From having the chance to know each other. James took a step toward her. Emily, your mother made a difficult choice, but she made it out of love, for both of us. I'm here now, and if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your life. Emily's hand closed around the locket. I need time. This is too much. She moved toward the door, grabbing her coat. Sweetheart, where are you going? Sarah called after her. To think, to breathe, to... I don't know. Emily paused at the door, not looking back. Please, both of you, just give me some space. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than a slam would have. Sarah collapsed onto the sofa, tears flowing freely now. James stood helplessly in the middle of the room, watching through the window as his daughter disappeared into the gathering dusk. Should we go after her? He asked. Sarah shook her head. She needs time. She's always been like that. Needs to process things on her own. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. Like you, actually. James sat heavily in the armchair. I've imagined finding out I had a child in 1,000 different ways over the years, he said quietly. None of them prepared me for this. They sat in silence, two people who had once known everything about each other, now connected by the pain of the daughter they had both lost tonight. Sarah for the second time, James for what felt like the first. The following week passed in a blur of awkward silences and careful avoidance. Emily continued working at the patisserie, but her usual warmth had been replaced by a protective shell of professional courtesy. When James attempted to visit, she would disappear into the kitchen, leaving other staff to handle his order. Her absence spoke louder than any words could have. James found himself standing outside the patisserie more often than he cared to admit, watching his daughter through the window as she worked. Her movements were still precise, but there was a new tension in her shoulders, a hint of distraction in her usually focused expression. Several times he noticed her touching the locket, only to snatch her hand away as if the metal burned. On a particularly rainy morning, James arrived earlier than usual, hoping to catch Emily before the morning rush. Instead, he found Sarah waiting outside, sheltering under a burgundy umbrella. She's not ready, Sarah said quietly as he approached. I thought I should warn you, she's barely speaking to me either. James nodded, falling into step beside her as they walked away from the patisserie. How is she, really? Angry. Confused. Sarah sighed, adjusting the umbrella to cover them both. She's been spending a lot of time in the garden working on her recipe book. It's what she does when she's trying to make sense of things. They found themselves in a small park, the rain keeping other visitors away. Sitting on a covered bench, they watched the drops create ripples in a nearby pond. I found these yesterday, Sarah said, pulling an envelope from her bag. I thought you might want to see them. She handed him a stack of photographs. Emily through the years. Her first steps, birthday parties, school graduations, culinary school acceptance letter in hand. James felt his throat tighten as he flipped through the images. She looked so happy in all of these. She is. Sarah watched him study the photos. That's part of why she's so angry, I think. She had built this narrative about you, the absent father who didn't know about her, so she couldn't blame you. Now she has to reconcile that with both the truth and the reality of who you are. And who am I? James asked, not looking up from a photo of Emily at her culinary school graduation, beaming in her chef's whites. You're James Harrison, the successful developer who's transformed half of Bath. Your name is on buildings in the local papers. All this time her father was just across the city building an empire. James carefully returned the photos to their envelope. I would have given it all up, you know, if you had told me. I know, Sarah replied softly. That's why I couldn't. They sat in companionable silence, the rain creating a curtain around their small sanctuary. Finally, James spoke again. Emily's dream is to open a boutique hotel. Sarah nodded. With a patisserie. She's been planning it since she was 16. Has journals full of designs and concepts. "Let me help her make it happen," James said. "Not as a way to buy her forgiveness, but because it's something I can actually do. I have the resources, the connections, the Millennium Hotel project. I could adapt it, make it hers." "That's not my decision to make," Sarah replied. "Not anymore," but she hesitated. "There's a food and hospitality expo next week in London. Emily's been talking about attending for months, but she's been hesitant about the cost." James understood the implicit suggestion. "Would you give her something for me?" He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. Sarah took it, peeking inside to find expo tickets, train passes, and hotel reservations at the Dorchester. "The Dorchester, James? Really?" He shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "If she's going to explore the luxury hotel business, she should experience the best, shouldn't she?" "I'll give them to her," Sarah promised. "But James, don't expect too much. She's as stubborn as both of us combined." "She can hate me forever if she wants to," James said quietly. "But I want her to have every opportunity to achieve her dreams. It's the least I can do for missing everything else." As they stood to leave, Sarah touched his arm. "There's something else you should know. She's been researching you, reading every article, every interview. I found her asleep at her laptop the other night, surrounded by printouts about your projects. Is that a good thing? It means she's trying to understand you. The real you, not just the idea of you she's carried all these years." Sarah smiled sadly. "Just be patient. She'll come around when she's ready." James watched Sarah walk away, disappearing into the rain like a ghost from his past. In his pocket, he felt the weight of the replica locket he still carried everywhere. He had planned to give it to Emily, a symbol of his desire to bridge the past and present, but now he wondered if perhaps some gaps couldn't be filled with physical tokens. Returning to his office, James found himself looking at the Millennium Hotel plans with new eyes. What had started as another luxury development could become something more, a legacy, a peace offering, a future. He began to sketch new ideas in the margins, a patisserie in the lobby, a rooftop garden for fresh herbs, kitchen spaces designed for culinary excellence. If Emily would let him, he could help build not just a hotel but a bridge between their worlds. And if she wouldn't, well, he would make sure the opportunity was there anyway, waiting for her when she was ready. Emily stood in the marble-clad lobby of the Dorchester, her weekend bag clutched tightly to her side, feeling both awed and out of place. The expo tickets and hotel reservation had arrived via her mother with a simple note. "An opportunity if you want it. James." Her first instinct had been to refuse, to send it all back with a polite but firm rejection. Yet here she was, checking into one of London's most prestigious hotels. "Welcome to the Dorchester, Ms. Carter." The receptionist smiled warmly, handling her check-in with practiced elegance. "Mr. Harrison has arranged for your stay in one of our executive suites, and our pastry chef, Jean-Philippe, is expecting you in the kitchen at your convenience. He's quite excited to share some of our signature techniques." Emily felt her breath catch. Of course, James hadn't just booked her a room. He had orchestrated an entire experience. She should have expected nothing less from a man who built luxury hotels for a living. The suite was larger than her entire flat back home. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Hyde Park, and on the elegant writing desk, she found a leather-bound portfolio containing detailed information about the hotel's operations, from its kitchens to its business model. Next to it lay a handwritten note. "Emily, I hope you'll find this stay both educational and inspiring. The hotel staff knows you're a talented pastry chef interested in hotel operations. They're at your disposal for any questions or insights you might have. There's no obligation. This is simply an opportunity to explore your dreams from the inside. James." She sat on the plush sofa, fighting the conflicting emotions that had become her constant companions over the past week. The man who had missed her entire childhood was now opening doors she had only dreamed about. It would be easier if he were trying to buy her affection with empty gestures, but this showed he had actually listened, had understood what really mattered to her. The next morning, Emily found herself in the Dorchester's pristine kitchens, watching Jean-Philippe demonstrate the hotel's famous chocolate soufflé. The French pastry chef was a willing mentor, sharing not just recipes, but insights about running a high-end hotel pâtisserie. "The key, ma chérie," he explained, piping perfect rosettes onto a wedding cake, "is to understand that in a hotel like this, We are not just making desserts. We are creating experiences, memories. Every detail must be perfect. Emily thought about her own creations at the patisserie, how she had always strived for that same perfection. How do you balance creativity with consistency, especially with multiple outlets in the hotel? Jean-Philippe's eyes lit up at her question. "Ah, you think like a businesswoman as well as a chef. Come, let me show you our production schedules, our quality control systems." The morning stretched into afternoon as Emily absorbed everything she could about the hotel's operations. She took notes until her hand cramped, asked questions until she felt almost embarrassed by her curiosity. But Jean-Philippe never tired of explaining, seeming to recognize in her the same passion that had driven his own career. Later, at the Hospitality Expo, Emily found herself looking at equipment and supplies with new eyes. She wasn't just seeing prices and specifications, she was seeing possibilities. Each booth became a potential piece of her own future hotel, each conversation a stepping stone toward her dream. At a demonstration of custom kitchen design, she bumped into Alexandra Chen, one of the industry's most respected hotel consultants. To Emily's surprise, Alexandra seemed to know who she was. "You must be Emily Carter," Alexandra smiled warmly. "James Harrison spoke very highly of your vision for a boutique hotel. He mentioned you might be here today." Emily felt her defenses rise automatically at James's name, but curiosity won out. "You know James?" "Of course. We've worked on several projects together. In fact," Alexandra paused, studying Emily's face, "he's asked me to consult on the Millennium Hotel project in Bath, though from what he's told me, it might be evolving into something quite different from the original plan." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Different how?" "Well, that's not really my place to say," Alexandra replied diplomatically, "but I would love to hear your thoughts on boutique hotels. Perhaps over dinner? I'm particularly interested in your idea of integrating a high-end patisserie into the concept." Over dinner at one of London's finest restaurants, Emily found herself sharing her dreams with Alexandra, who listened intently and offered practical advice drawn from years of experience. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from kitchen layouts to financial projections. "You know," Alexandra said as they finished their dessert, "your father didn't ask me to meet with you." Emily stiffened slightly at the word father. "But you said—" "He told me you'd be here, yes, mentioned that you were talented and had an interesting concept. But this dinner was my idea. I like to keep an eye out for fresh talent in the industry." Alexandra smiled. "Though I have to say, watching you talk about your vision, I can see where you get your entrepreneurial spirit from." Back in her suite that night, Emily stood at the window, watching the lights of London twinkle below. She thought about James, imagining him here years ago, young and ambitious, building his future while unknowingly leaving her behind. But now he was trying to build something else, a bridge between their worlds, using the language they both understood: creation, detail, excellence. She took off the locket, opening it to study the young man in the photograph. For the first time, she could see traces of herself in his features, the determined set of the jaw, the intensity in the eyes. Her fingers traced the pattern of roses on the case, thinking about the care it must have taken to have something so unique made. Reaching for her phone, Emily opened her email and began to type. "Dear James, thank you for arranging this weekend. I'm learning a lot about the industry, but also about other things. Perhaps when I return to Bath, we could meet to discuss the Millennium Hotel project. I have some ideas I'd like to share. Emily." She hit send before she could change her mind, then turned back to the window. Below her, London continued its elegant dance of lights and shadows. Much like the complicated dance she was now beginning with the father she never knew she had. The conference room at Harrison Development's headquarters offered a panoramic view of Bath's historic skyline, but neither James nor Emily was looking at the view. Instead, their attention was focused on the large architectural drawings spread across the polished oak table between them. "The original plans called for a traditional luxury hotel," James explained, his finger tracing the blueprints. "But I've been working with the architects on some modifications." He pulled out a new set of drawings. "I thought you might be interested in seeing them." Emily leaned forward, her professional curiosity temporarily overwhelming her emotional guardedness. The new plans showed a completely reimagined ground floor, with a spacious patisserie taking pride of place in the lobby. A demonstration kitchen was visible from both the restaurant and the street, and a rooftop garden provided space for growing fresh herbs and edible flowers. "You've changed everything," she said softly, noting how the entire flow of the hotel had been redesigned around culinary experiences. "Not everything," James replied. "The bones are the same, but the heart—" He paused, aware of the metaphor's weight. "The heart is different. The question is, what do you think?" Emily walked around the table, studying the plans from different angles. Her fingers traced the outline of the patisserie space, mentally arranging equipment and workflow patterns. "The ventilation system in the demonstration kitchen needs to be reconsidered," she said finally. "And the prep area should be larger if you're planning to service both the patisserie and the restaurant." James made notes on the plans. "What else?" "The herb garden is beautiful, but impractical for Bath's climate. We'd need a greenhouse structure to maintain year-round production." She looked up to find James smiling. "What? You said we," he observed quietly. Emily felt her cheeks flush. "I meant theoretically. I'm just offering professional opinions." "Of course." James kept his tone neutral, but his eyes sparkled. "What are your thoughts on this space?" He pointed to a large area marked multi-function room. "It could work for cooking classes," Emily said thoughtfully, "or guest chef demonstrations. The Dorchester runs similar programs." She stopped, realizing she was revealing how much she'd learned from his arranged weekend. "Alexandra Chen mentioned you had some interesting ideas about educational programming," James ventured carefully. She was quite impressed. Emily straightened, crossing her arms. "Did you plan that, arrange for her to meet me?" "No," James said firmly. "I merely mentioned you would be there. Alexandra makes her own decisions. She's rather famous for it, actually." He smiled slightly. "Cost me a major contract in Liverpool last year because she didn't approve of the design." Despite herself, Emily felt her lips twitch. "She mentioned that story. Said you redesigned the entire project based on her criticism." "Well, she was right." James shrugged. "Sometimes the best things come from being willing to start over." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Emily turned back to the plans, but her mind was elsewhere. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "Changing your entire project?" James was quiet for a long moment. "When I left Bath all those years ago, I thought success meant building the biggest, most impressive buildings possible. Now," he gestured to the plans, "now I think it means building something that matters, something that could be a legacy." "A legacy," Emily repeated. "For the daughter you just found out about." "For the daughter who has her own dreams," James corrected gently. "I'm not trying to buy your affection, Emily. I'm trying to offer you an opportunity to build something extraordinary. Whether you want me involved in your life beyond that is entirely your decision." Emily sat down, suddenly tired. "It's not that simple. Every time I think I've figured out how I feel about all this, something shifts. When I'm angry, you do something thoughtful. When I want to keep my distance, you show me something like this." She gestured to the plans. "It would be easier if you were just trying to throw money at the situation." "Would you prefer that?" James asked, sitting across from her. "No," Emily admitted. "But I don't know how to be your daughter. I don't know how to reconcile the successful businessman who changed these plans for me with the man who wasn't there for my first day of school, or when I won the regional baking competition, or when Mum worked double shifts to buy my first professional mixer." James felt each missing moment like a moment. Physical pain. "I can't change the past, Emily. I can't give you back those moments, but I can be here now supporting your dreams if you'll let me." Emily stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city they both called home. "The hotel," she said finally. "If we do this, it needs to be a partnership. Not a gift, not a peace offering. I need to earn my place." "Of course," James agreed quickly. "You'd need to work with the development team, learn every aspect of the business. It would take time, hard work." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Emily interrupted. "I'm afraid of—" She trailed off. "Of what?" "Of letting you in," she whispered. "Of building something together, and then—" She couldn't finish the sentence. James stood, but didn't approach her. "I'm not going anywhere, Emily." "Not this time." She turned to face him, her expression a complex mixture of hope and hesitation. "The pastry kitchen needs a proof box for the bread program," she said finally, "and the storage area should be climate-controlled for chocolate work." James picked up his pen, smiling. Tell me more. For the next 2 hours, they lost themselves in discussions of kitchen equipment, guest flow patterns, and marketing strategies. If anyone noticed that James Harrison's eyes grew suspiciously bright when his daughter expertly critiqued his original plans, or that Emily's professional mask slipped whenever her father praised her ideas, they were kind enough not to mention it. Sarah Carter had always found solace among her books. The library's quiet corners had been her refuge through 2 decades of single motherhood, through every triumph and challenge of raising Emily alone. But lately, even the familiar smell of old paper and leather bindings couldn't calm her racing thoughts. From her office window, she could see Emily and James leaving the Harrison Development building together, their heads bent over what appeared to be a tablet. They had been meeting regularly for the past 2 weeks, their conversations about the hotel project gradually extending into longer discussions over coffee or lunch. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reshelved a stack of books. She had wanted this, hadn't she? For Emily to know her father, for James to have a chance to be part of their daughter's life, yet watching it happen brought unexpected waves of emotion she wasn't prepared to handle. Sarah, Emily's voice startled her from her thoughts. Her daughter stood in the doorway of her office, looking more animated than she had in weeks. Do you have time for lunch? 20 minutes later, they sat in their favorite cafe, the one they'd been visiting since Emily was old enough to appreciate proper scones. Emily was buzzing with excitement, spreading out design sketches across their small table. James thinks we can break ground by spring, she explained, pointing to various details. The rooftop greenhouse was my idea. We'll be able to grow our own herbs and edible flowers year-round. And look at the patisserie layout! Sarah watched her daughter's enthusiasm with a mixture of joy and something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. You're calling him James now? Emily's hands stilled on the papers. Sometimes it's complicated. Easier to think of him as a business partner than... She trailed off, looking at her mother carefully. Are you okay with all this? Sarah forced a smile. Of course, darling. It's wonderful to see you so excited about the project. Mum? Emily reached across the table to take her hand. I know this isn't easy for you either, having him back in our lives, watching us work together. I'm fine, Sarah insisted, but her voice wavered slightly. You're not. Emily squeezed her hand. And that's okay. I'm not either, not really. Every time I get excited about something with the hotel, I feel guilty, like I'm betraying you somehow. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. Oh, sweetheart, no. You have nothing to feel guilty about. I'm the one who kept you apart all these years. Because you thought you were protecting both of us, Emily said softly. I understand that now. James, he told me about how driven he was back then, how consumed by ambition. He said you were right. He would have given everything up if he'd known about me, and he probably would have resented it eventually. Sarah looked down at their joined hands. He said that? Emily nodded. We've been talking, not just about the hotel. He's been telling me stories about your university days, about how you were the one who taught him to appreciate beautiful things, to see beyond just profit margins. He remembers that? Sarah couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. He remembers everything about you, Mum. The way you always had flour on your apron because you stress-baked before exams, how you could quote entire passages from Jane Austen from memory. He said... Emily hesitated. He said, I have your grace in the kitchen. Sarah wiped at her eyes with her free hand. You have so much more than that, darling. You have his determination, his eye for detail. I see it every time you work on a new recipe. I was thinking, Emily said carefully, maybe you could help with the hotel too. The library, it's beautiful, but it's not being utilized fully. We could create a literary-themed tea service with pastries inspired by classic books. Your knowledge would be invaluable. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. You want me involved? Of course I do. You're my mother. You're the one who taught me to bake, who supported every crazy dream I ever had, including this one. Emily squeezed her hand again. Besides, James says the hotel should be a family legacy. That means you too. Before Sarah could respond, the cafe door chimed and James himself walked in. He stopped short when he saw them, uncertainty crossing his features. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I can come back. No, both women said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. Join us, Sarah found herself saying. Emily was just showing me the latest plans. James sat down carefully, maintaining what felt like a respectful distance. I hope you approve of the changes we've made to the original design. Emily was suggesting I might have something to contribute as well, Sarah said, watching his reaction carefully. James's face lit up. The literary tea service. Emily mentioned the idea yesterday. I think it's brilliant. This is your city too, Sarah. Your influence on it should be more than just the books you curate. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. I might have some ideas about the library space. Of course you do, Emily smiled. For you always have the best ideas. For the next hour, the three of them really talked about the hotel, about books, about dreams both old and new. If there were moments when the conversation stumbled, when old pain surfaced in someone's eyes, they acknowledged it and moved forward together. As they were leaving, James handed Sarah a small package. I found these in my mother's attic, he said quietly. I thought you might want them. Later that evening, Sarah opened the package to find a stack of old photographs, her and James in their university days, young and in love, full of dreams they thought would last forever. At the bottom was a note. Some dreams take longer to come true than others. Thank you for giving me a second chance with our daughter. Sarah placed the photos carefully in her desk drawer, next to the ones of Emily growing up. Perhaps it was time to start a new album, one that could hold both past and present, all the pieces of their complicated family finally coming together. The construction site of the Millennium Hotel had become a hive of activity, with workers swarming over the skeleton of what would soon be Bath's newest landmark. Emily stood at the edge of the site, hard hat firmly in place, reviewing the latest modifications to the kitchen specifications with the project manager. These ventilation ducts need to be relocated, she insisted, pointing to the blueprints. The current placement will affect the temperature control in the chocolate room. The project manager, Steve, looked uncomfortable. Miss Carter, changing the ventilation system at this stage will delay the entire project by at least 3 weeks. Mr. Harrison has been very clear about the timeline. Then call him, Emily challenged, standing her ground, because I can guarantee he'll be more concerned about the quality of the final product than about 3 weeks. Before Steve could respond, James's voice came from behind them. Is there a problem? Emily turned to face her father, noting how the construction team straightened instinctively in his presence. The ventilation system needs to be modified. I've explained why, but Steve seems to think the timeline is more important than getting it right. James studied the blueprints carefully, his expression neutral. Steve, what's your assessment? Sir, the changes Miss Carter is requesting would push us back significantly. The investors are expecting... The investors, James interrupted quietly, are expecting excellence. Emily, walk me through your concerns. For the next 15 minutes, Emily detailed the technical requirements for proper chocolate work, the importance of temperature control, and the long-term implications of incorrect ventilation. James listened intently, asking precise questions that showed he'd been studying up on pastry kitchen requirements. Make the changes, he finally instructed Steve, and have the engineers review the entire HVAC system. If Emily's caught this issue, there might be others we need to address. After Steve hurried away, Emily turned to her father. You didn't have to do that. I could have handled it. I know you could have, James replied, a hint of pride in his voice. But you shouldn't have to fight these battles alone. That's what partners are for. They walked through the construction site together, discussing various aspects of the project. Workers nodded respectfully as they passed, and Emily noticed how some did a double take, perhaps noting the similar way father and daughter carried themselves, the matching intensity in their expressions. The investors are meeting next week, James mentioned as they reached the area that would become the patisserie. I'd like you to present the culinary concept to them. Emily stopped short. Me? But you always handle the investor meetings. It's your vision, Emily. You should be the one to present it. He paused, watching her reaction. Unless you don't feel ready. I'm ready, she said quickly, perhaps too quickly. What if they don't take me seriously? I'm only 21, and this is my first hotel project. James turned to face her fully. When I was 25, I walked into a room full of investors and convinced them to fund my first major development. I was terrified, but I believed in my vision. You have something I didn't have then. Actual experience in your field. You've trained at one of the best culinary schools in the world. You've run a successful patisserie, and you understand both the creative and business aspects of this industry." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, but uncertainty still nagged. "Did you tell them? About who I am to you?" "No," James said softly. "I wanted that to be your decision. But Emily, they'll invest in this project because it's brilliant, not because you're my daughter." Later that evening, Emily sat at her mother's kitchen table, surrounded by sample menus and presentation materials. Sarah moved around the kitchen, stress baking as she always did when she was worried about her daughter. "Mum, I can't focus with you hovering," Emily sighed, looking up from her laptop. "I'm fine, really." Sarah placed a fresh batch of lavender shortbread on the table. "I know you are, it's a lot of pressure. Are you sure James isn't pushing too hard?" "He's not pushing at all," Emily defended. "If anything, he's been incredibly supportive. He's given me access to all his resources, his team, but he lets me make the decisions about my areas of expertise." Sarah sat down, studying her daughter's face. "You really trust him, don't you?" Emily was quiet for a moment, considering. "I trust him professionally," she said finally. "The other stuff, that's still complicated, but when it comes to the hotel, yes, I trust him completely." "And the presentation? Are you ready for that?" Emily grabbed a piece of shortbread, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent. "Almost. I'm meeting James tomorrow to do a practice run. He's bringing in Alexandra Chen to give feedback." "Alexandra Chen, the hotel consultant." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "She's not easy to impress." "I know," Emily smiled. "That's why I asked James to bring her in. I don't want any special treatment. If this is going to work, I need to know I've earned it." The next day in James's office, Emily stood before Alexandra Chen and her father, presenting her vision for the hotel's culinary program. She outlined her plans for the patisserie, the cooking classes, the literary-themed afternoon teas her mother was developing. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke about sourcing local ingredients, about creating experiences that would draw both tourists and locals. "Your technical knowledge is solid," Alexandra said when she finished. "But tell me this, why this project? Why now? What makes it special?" Emily glanced at James before answering. "Because it's not just about luxury or profit. It's about creating something that matters, something that combines tradition and innovation, something that honors the past while building for the future." She took a deep breath. "It's about legacy." Alexandra smiled slowly. "Now that, Ms. Carter, is an answer worthy of your name, both of them." That evening, as Emily packed up her presentation materials, James lingered in the office doorway. "You know," he said casually, "I've been thinking about the hotel's name." "Oh?" Emily looked up. "Having second thoughts about Millennium." "Actually, yes." He handed her a preliminary design for the hotel's logo. Instead of Millennium Hotel, it read The Carter House. Emily stared at the design, her vision blurring slightly. "But your name, the Harrison brand, is strong enough to support this change," James finished. "Besides, it's not about my name anymore. It's about honoring the two women who have taught me what really matters." Emily stood, crossing the room to hug her father for the first time. It was brief, slightly awkward, but genuine. "Thank you," she whispered. "You still have to convince the investors," he reminded her, his voice rough with emotion. "I will," she promised, and they both knew she was talking about more than just the presentation. The morning of the investor presentation dawned bright and clear over Bath. Emily stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her chef's whites one last time. She had debated wearing a business suit, but ultimately decided to embrace her identity as a culinary professional. The pristine jacket with the Carter House embroidered in elegant script over the heart felt like armor. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "The samples from the test kitchen have arrived. Everything looks perfect. See you at 9. Another message followed immediately from her mother. "You'll be brilliant, darling. They won't know what hit them." The boardroom at Harrison Development was already filling with investors when Emily arrived. James stood at the front of the room, discussing something with Alexandra Chen, who had flown in specially for the presentation. The table was set with elegant place settings, each one featuring a small selection of Emily's signature pastries. "This is unusual, Harrison," one of the investors commented, examining a perfectly crafted passion fruit macaron. "Usually your presentations involve profit projections and market analyses, not—" afternoon tea. Today is about experiencing the vision, not just hearing about it, James replied smoothly. I believe you'll find it compelling. His eyes met Emily's across the room, conveying confidence and support. Emily took her position at the front of the room, grateful for the years of competition baking that had taught her to perform under pressure. She looked out at the assembled investors, some of the most powerful people in British hospitality, and began. Ladies and gentlemen, the Carter House isn't just another luxury hotel. It's a revolution in experiential hospitality. She gestured to the pastries before them. What you're tasting now is just a small sample of what we'll offer. But more importantly, it represents our philosophy, that true luxury lies in authenticity, craftsmanship, and connection. For the next hour, Emily led them through her vision. She showed them detailed plans for the culinary programs, demonstrated the innovative booking system for cooking classes, and explained how the literary-themed spaces would create unique experiences for guests. Her passion was evident in every word, her expertise clear in every detail. The numbers are all in your packets, she concluded, but what can't be quantified is the soul of this project. We're not just building a hotel, we're creating a destination that celebrates Bath's heritage while pushing the boundaries of modern hospitality. The room was silent for a moment before the questions began. They were tough, probing questions about operational costs, staffing challenges, and market positioning. Emily handled each one with confidence, her preparations with James and Alexandra proving invaluable. Ms. Carter, one investor spoke up, your passion and expertise are impressive, but this is quite a departure from the original Millennium Hotel concept. Why should we trust such an ambitious revision to someone so new to hotel development? Emily felt James shift beside her, ready to intervene, but she placed a subtle hand on his arm. Mr. Peterson, would you say Harrison Development's success is built on playing it safe? The investor blinked. Well, no, but the original Millennium concept was sound, Emily acknowledged, but it was also safe. What we're proposing is something unique in the market. Yes, I'm new to hotel development, but I bring years of culinary expertise and a fresh perspective. And I'm fortunate to have the support of both Harrison Development's experience and Alexandra Chen's industry knowledge. She paused, looking each investor in the eye. But more than that, I bring something that can't be learned or bought. A personal stake in this project's success. The Carter House isn't just a business venture for me, it's my legacy. Alexandra Chen spoke up from the back of the room. I've consulted on luxury hotel projects worldwide, and I can tell you that what Ms. Carter is proposing isn't just viable, it's exactly what the market is craving. Authenticity sells, and this concept has it in spades. The discussion continued, but Emily could sense the mood shifting. The investors were no longer just being polite. They were genuinely engaged, asking questions about details, suggesting potential partnerships. After the formal presentation, as the investors mingled over coffee and more pastries, Emily found herself drawn into conversations about everything from sourcing local ingredients to international marketing strategies. She caught glimpses of James watching her proudly as she handled each interaction with growing confidence. Well done, Alexandra murmured as she passed by. You've won them over. Even Peterson, and he never likes anything new. Later, as the last investors filed out, James closed the boardroom door and turned to Emily. That was terrifying, Emily supplied, finally allowing herself to slump into a chair. Extraordinary, James corrected. You didn't just present a business plan, you made them believe in your dream. He sat down beside her. I'm proud of you, Emily. Not just of the presentation, but of how you've handled everything these past few months. Emily felt tears threatening. I couldn't have done it without you. Both of you, she added as Sarah slipped into the room, having waited anxiously in James's office during the presentation. Oh, darling, Sarah hurried to embrace her daughter. How did it go? She was brilliant, James answered. They'll approve the funding by the end of the week. The Carter House is going to happen. Sarah's eyes widened at the name. The Carter House, but I thought, it's perfect, isn't it? Emily smiled. A tribute to the woman who raised me and taught me everything I know about pursuing dreams. Sarah looked between her daughter and James, her eyes filling with tears. And the woman who's about to show the world exactly what she's capable of. We should celebrate, James suggested. Dinner? I know a quiet place with an excellent wine cellar. Emily laughed. Actually, I have a better idea. Mum, do we still have Grandma's old recipe for celebration cake? The one with the orange zest and honey? Sarah's face lit up. Of course. Then let's go home, Emily said, including both her parents in her smile. Let's bake together, all of us. And so they did. In Sarah's small kitchen, with flour dusting their expensive clothes and laughter filling the air, three people who had once been strangers to each other began to feel like something else entirely. A family. The days leading up to the Carter house's grand opening were a whirlwind of activity. Emily hadn't left the hotel's kitchen in what felt like days, perfecting every recipe, training her hand-picked staff, and ensuring every detail was absolutely perfect. The culmination of months of work was finally at hand, and the pressure was both exhilarating and overwhelming. The chocolate sculptures need to be assembled in the morning, she instructed her pastry team, checking items off her endless list. The humidity in here is finally stable enough after the ventilation adjustments. She smiled briefly, remembering the battle over those ducts that had marked a turning point in her relationship with James. Emily. Sarah's voice came from the kitchen doorway. You need to come see this. Following her mother through the hotel's elegant corridors, Emily marveled at how the space had transformed from blueprints to reality. The walls were adorned with commissioned artwork, featuring scenes from classic literature, while the custom carpets incorporated subtle patterns of opened books and floating pages. Every detail reflected the perfect fusion of culinary excellence and literary charm that they had envisioned. They reached the hotel's library, where James stood watching as workers carefully installed the final piece of the space, a magnificent stained glass window depicting a rose garden with books scattered among the blooms. The design incorporated elements from both the original locket and the hotel's new logo. It's beautiful, Emily breathed, standing between her parents. It's perfect, Sarah agreed, her eyes glistening. Though I still can't believe you named the reading nooks after my favorite literary heroines. Elizabeth Bennet's Corner has already become the most requested spot for afternoon tea reservations, James informed them with a smile. And we haven't even opened yet. Emily watched the light play through the stained glass, casting colored shadows across the room. I can't believe we're actually here. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was just serving coffee at the pâtisserie. And now look at you, Sarah said proudly. Executive chef and co-owner of the Carter House. The title still felt surreal to Emily. After the successful investor presentation, James had insisted on making her a proper partner in the venture, not just the chef. You've earned this, he had said, sliding the ownership papers across his desk. This is your dream too. The press preview is tomorrow, James reminded them gently. Are we ready? Emily squared her shoulders. The kitchen is prepared. All the signature dishes are perfected, and the staff knows every recipe by heart. Mum? The literary program is fully developed, Sarah confirmed. The first editions are secured in their display cases, and the themed reading lists are printed. The local Authors Guild is thrilled about the monthly reading series. James nodded approvingly. The bookings for the first 3 months are already at capacity. The concept is generating exactly the buzz we hoped for. They walked together through the hotel, each lost in their own thoughts. In the main lobby, Emily paused before a large photograph that hung in a position of honor. The original Carter's patisserie on the day it had opened. The small shop where everything had changed. I have something for both of you, James said suddenly. Wait here. He returned moments later carrying 2 small boxes. I had these made, well, you'll see. Sarah opened hers first, gasping softly as she lifted out a locket identical to the original one she had given Emily. Inside was a photo of Emily at her culinary school graduation, beaming in her chef's whites. Emily's box contained a similar locket, but when she opened it, she found a photo she had never seen before. Her parents in their university days, young and happy, sitting together on a park bench with books scattered around them. On the opposite side was a recent photo of the 3 of them in the hotel's kitchen, taken during one of their many planning sessions. James, Sarah whispered, touching her locket gently. The past and the present, he said quietly. All the moments that led us here. Emily felt tears threatening. They're perfect, but, she hesitated, I think the original needs updating too. She reached for the locket she still wore every day, opening it to reveal the old photo of young James. Maybe it's time for a new picture. The next morning dawned, bright and clear. Emily stood in her office, adjusting her chef's whites one last time before the press arrived. The kitchen was humming with activity, the scent of freshly baked bread and chocolate filling the air. Through her window, she could see the final touches being added to the hotel's entrance, elegant topiaries and welcoming benches that made the grand building feel somehow both impressive and inviting. A knock at her door revealed both her parents, James in his perfectly tailored suit, Sarah elegant in a dress that matched the hotel's color scheme. "Ready?" James asked. Emily touched her locket, feeling the weight of both history and future in its familiar shape. "Ready." As they walked together toward the lobby where the press waited, Emily felt a profound sense of rightness. This building, this dream made real, was more than just a hotel. It was the story of three people finding their way back to each other, of old wounds healing, of new beginnings born from past endings. The Carter house was about to open its doors, not just to guests, but to the next chapter of their shared story. And as Emily caught her reflection in one of the gleaming windows, standing tall between her mother and father, all three of them wearing matching expressions of pride and anticipation, she knew that some dreams were worth waiting for. "Let's do this," she said, reaching for both their hands. Together. The evening of the Carter house's grand opening was nothing short of magical. The Georgian architecture glowed warmly in the setting sun, while strings of elegant lights illuminated the courtyard garden. Inside, every detail that Emily, James, and Sarah had meticulously planned over the past months had come together perfectly. The lobby buzzed with the excited chatter of Bath's elite, local dignitaries, and carefully selected guests. Food critics mingled with literary figures, all sampling Emily's creations while admiring the thoughtfully curated spaces. The air was filled with the subtle scent of fresh flowers and newly baked pastries, creating an atmosphere that was both luxurious and welcoming. In the hotel's demonstration kitchen, Emily put the finishing touches on a chocolate showpiece that would serve as the evening's centerpiece, an intricate sculpture that combined culinary artistry with literary references. Books crafted from chocolate opened to reveal sugar-spun pages, while delicate chocolate roses climbed between them, echoing the design of the lockets that now connected 3 generations of their family. "It's stunning," Sarah said softly, appearing at her daughter's side. She was elegant in a deep blue dress, her own locket gleaming at her throat. "Just like everything else you've created here." Emily smiled, adjusting one final rose. "We created it together, all of us." She looked around the kitchen, her kitchen, with pride. Every surface gleamed, every workstation was perfectly organized. Her team moved with practiced precision, turning out plate after perfect plate of canapés and petit fours. "The library is already drawing attention," Sarah continued, her eyes shining. "2 publishers have approached me about hosting their launch events here, and a famous author wants to do a writing retreat workshop." "That's wonderful, Mum." Emily hugged her mother carefully, mindful of her chef's whites. "I knew your literary programs would be a hit." James appeared in the doorway, looking distinguished in his tuxedo. "They're ready for the official opening ceremony. Are you prepared?" Emily took a deep breath, touching her locket for reassurance. "Yes. Just need to change quickly." In her office, Emily changed into the dress she'd chosen for the evening, an elegant creation in the hotel's signature colors. As she fastened her locket around her neck, she caught sight of all 3 of their reflections in the mirror, she and her parents, each wearing their matching lockets, each bearing witness to how far they'd come. "Before we go out there," James said quietly, "I want you both to know something." He seemed unusually emotional. "These past months, watching this place come together, working with you both, it's given me more than I ever dreamed possible. It's given me my family." Sarah reached for his hand, her eyes soft. "We've all found something we didn't know we were missing." Emily looked at her parents, her mother, who had given her everything, and her father, who was trying so hard to make up for lost time. "The Carter house isn't just a hotel," she said. "It's our second chance, all of us." The opening ceremony took place in the grand lobby. Emily stood between her parents as James addressed the gathered crowd, his voice carrying clearly through the space. 22 years ago, I left Bath in pursuit of success," he began. "I thought I knew exactly what that meant. Buildings, profits, expansion. But life has a way of teaching us what really matters." He smiled at Emily and Sarah. The Carter House represents more than just luxury hospitality. It represents family, redemption, and the power of second chances. Emily stepped forward to speak next, her voice steady and clear. When we designed this hotel, we wanted to create more than just a place to stay. We wanted to create a place where stories come to life, where memories are made, where connections are forged and strengthened. She touched her locket. Every detail here has meaning, from the literary-themed spaces curated by my mother, Sarah Carter, to the culinary programs that blend tradition with innovation. Sarah completed their presentation, speaking about the cultural programs and literary elements that made the hotel unique. As she described their vision of creating a space where culture, cuisine, and comfort intersected, Emily noticed tears in more than a few eyes among the audience. The ribbon cutting was a joint effort, all three of them together, marking the official opening of the Carter House. As applause filled the lobby, Emily felt a profound sense of completion. This wasn't just the end of a construction project, it was the beginning of something much more significant. Later that evening, as the party was in full swing, Emily found a quiet moment in the rooftop garden. The lights of Bath spread out before her, and above stars twinkled in the clear night sky. She could hear the sounds of celebration floating up from below, laughter, music, the happy buzz of conversation. Her parents joined her there, each carrying a glass of champagne. Without speaking, they moved to stand on either side of her, forming a small family circle in the peaceful garden. "To the Carter House," James proposed, raising his glass. "To second chances," Sarah added softly. Emily touched her locket, feeling the weight of both photos inside. The past and the present, the lost years and the found ones, all the pieces that had finally come together to make them whole. "To family," she said, her voice full of emotion. "However long it takes to find each other." As they stood together under the stars, their glasses touching in a quiet toast, Emily knew that while the Carter House might be open for business, their real achievement wasn't the hotel itself. It was the journey that had brought them here, to this moment, this understanding, this love that had survived secrets and silence and time itself. The lockets they wore weren't just jewelry anymore. They were symbols of their story, a story of loss and discovery, of dreams deferred and dreams realized, of a family that had found its way home at last. Below them, the Carter House glowed with warmth and welcome, ready to host other people's stories. But up here in this quiet garden, three people who had once been strangers stood together as family, their own story still unfolding, still growing, still full of possibilities. And in the end, that was the greatest success of all.